Hey, what's up, everybody? BDF 44 coming at you with another video. All right, so I'm eating dinner here, and I was watching Stephen A. Smith's response to Willie D. And I wanted to bring this to the conversation, this topic to the conversation, because I think it's somewhat, I feel like my opinion can be good for the conversation if people care, and I'll explain why. So basically, Stephen A. Smith initially got on his platform and spent about 14 minutes talking about why O.J. Simpson should not be celebrating the BET Awards and the memorial, because O.J. of course recently passed away from cancer about maybe 6 months ago, maybe a little less than that. And so he got on his platform, was essentially making this point about, he didn't appreciate that and it shouldn't have been done, and all of the various different things. I encourage you guys to check out his platform for his opinion. But one of the things that OJ said, not OJ, excuse me, Stephen A. said, forgive me. One of the things that Stephen A. said was that OJ Simpson didn't care about black people. And he often references a statement that OJ once said, of which I think I heard on a Jay-Z song, that Jay-Z actually took the excerpt. He said, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." And I think Stephen A. Smith, along with many other people, ran with that to mean that O.J. Simpson didn't care about black people at all, and that he shouldn't be celebrated, not only because of what it was that he was accused of doing and went to trial for, but was acquitted for it. Ended up taking on also a civil suit for which he was found liable. Those are the facts in the situation. But he said not only should he not have been celebrated for that, but because he didn't care about black people. And that's where I think my opinion can be constructed. See, one of the black people that OJ allegedly didn't care about was my mother, who happened to be one of his good friends. As I've told you guys several times on this camera, my mother used to tell me about OJ well before that situation took place, for which two people lost their lives in a very, very horrifying situation. Condolences to their families who are still mourning to this day, for which I will not exclude from the conversation, because at the end of the day, there are people who are healing at this point on both sides. People who both lost OJ, and of course those who lost the victims. Stephen A. Smith referenced the trial itself, for which I was too young to really pay close attention to. I do remember the verdict, watching it in my classroom. I do remember circumstances before the trial, like, the Bronco situation, of which, believe it or not, as I've said before, my mother's ex-boyfriend was driving that Bronco, Al Cowlings. My mother was with him for 3 years, seen pictures and everything. So, it's one of those situations where I just think that Stephen A. Smith spoke matter-of-factly about an opinion of someone who's no longer here. And I was given some insight as to the contrary of that opinion as it pertains to that specific thing. Now, whether OJ committed these murders or not, like I said, I didn't watch the trial. One of Stephen A. Smith's biggest points about why he believed OJ was guilty was because he watched the trial in a close way every day for 8 months. I did not. I was too young to. I don't know the details of that trial. For all I know, after watching that much of the footage as he did, maybe I walk away with the same opinion that he did it, but I walk away without enough knowledge to say that I have a constructive opinion about his guilty verdict, or the innocence of the man, rather. But what I can say is this: my mother told me many times, many stories about O.J. Simpson being a good friend to her before his career took off at USC. A good homie, so to speak. Someone that she would spend a lot of time with, along with other friends. Like I said, his best friend, Al Collins, was her boyfriend, so that's how close they were for a good portion of time in San Francisco, at Potrero Hill. We went to the same high school, Galileo High. So my mother had insight to OJ before that statement was said, and likely had lost full touch with him after he got big. But to make a blanketed statement about someone not caring about their own people, I just believe that my mother illustrated enough examples in our life, me discussing him with her, to know that that should not be held onto so tight as to say that a man hated his own people, or maybe to a lesser degree did not care about his own people, because my mother was one of his people. And on all accounts, they cared about one another a lot. His ex-wife, before he met the victim there, Miss Brown, rest in peace, was also somebody that my mother was familiar with and knew, and he loved her as well. He loved his wife, who was black. He loved his children, who were black. He loved his friends, who were black. So when we have this outward declaration about a person's intentions based on an excerpt that was taken probably out of context, in a time when a man was on cloud nine, probably his head was big from the success that he had received, and in the world we're in Hollywood, as many people find themselves in, we tend to take that piece of their lives and try to make it as if it's the definition of who they were in their entire lives. And I just think that that's a poor way to assess the people that are in our faces. It's a poor way to make the decision that a person should not be celebrated upon their passing. Now, if you want to say he was guilty, you had all that in mind, and that was the only reason why he shouldn't have been celebrated, like I said, I don't have an opinion about that. I really don't. But that wasn't the only thing that Stephen A. said. He said the man shouldn't be celebrated, and reiterated more than once, because he didn't care about us as black people. And while there may have been a time where O.J. Simpson may not have necessarily displayed a certain connection to the black community, I, as someone who was raised by one of his good friends, can't say that in good faith that he didn't care about black people. I can't say that. I can't, in my right mind, have a platform of my own without pushing back to that to some degree. Because my mother instilled that in me. Her love for that person. Beyond his transgressions, his mistakes, beyond whatever he may have done. I don't know what OJ did or did not do outside of what has been accused. For all I know, he was a god-awful human being. I don't know. But the person that my mother described, and the person that I trust, my mother, told me that this was one of her very best friends in life at one point, and had many good things to say about him throughout her life. Many. And I believe that I understood my mother to be a great human being, a kind human being, a God-fearing human being. So the credibility that I hold my mother to allows me to say this with confidence. I saw her choose her friends as I grew older. I saw her be a good friend to others as I grew older. So I knew what type of friend OJ had, based on seeing her be a friend to other people, and based on being her son in her household. So that holds a lot of weight. I know people have different relationships with their mothers, and they may equate their relationship to what mine was with my mom, but I'm telling you that the credibility she holds for telling me a person was solid is very high, based on how solid she was and appeared to be toward her friends. So I said all this to say, whether he was guilty or not, I'm not here to judge. He's being judged. And if he did what he did, then he's probably going to be suffering from here on out. If he did what he was accused of, whether. But to say a man shouldn't be memorialized because he didn't care about his people, I don't know that this particular human being that we're discussing didn't care about his people. I don't know that to be the case. In fact, I believed the contrary to that. And so I think that holds a lot of weight, because that was one of his biggest selling points for his opinion. And as someone who is mourning his mother right now, I just feel like she would want me to responsibly get on here and say something to that. Or otherwise, all those stories she told me about OJ back in high school and throughout college wouldn't necessarily hold the type of weight that it needs to weigh against what is being said about it. You know, when I think about the idea of him being guilty, I think about, and this sounds like an excuse, but it's a credible concern that I think about. If he did do this, I think about a guy like Aaron Hernandez. I think about all of the individuals who had CTE in the NFL, a brain dysfunctioning that it's turned a lot of people into violent individuals. And many of the NFL players that we know of who've done violent things were often suffering from that, from what we're coming to understand. Including Aaron Hernandez, who had one of the worst versions of that upon his passing. They did the autopsy on his brain and found that his was one of the worst cases they had ever found. The first case of CTE that was ever found was actually, ironically enough, in an NFL player by the name of John Mackey. John Mackey happens to also be a cousin of mine on my father's side. I was related to him. This is why my mind goes to CTE so quickly, because when I found out he was the first person diagnosed with it or found to have had it after his passing, it helped me understand that this is something that should be taken very seriously. I don't know that OJ did or did not do it, but what I am saying is that CTE has been proven to make it so that people can be completely out of their mind and doing things that they otherwise would not do. Violent things, demented things, strange behaviors. A lot of that stuff can come from the brain injury that is CTE, from my understanding. Loose, but centered understanding. Could it be possible that if OJ did in fact do this, that he also may have had CTE? I would like to know if they found it in his brain upon his passing. I do not know. I don't know that they checked for it or not. But is it possible that it may have been in his head? Could it have drove him to do what it is that ultimately people think he did? And if so, is there anything that should be considered in regards to that? A lot of people who commit some of the most heinous crimes in the world have been found to be sick mentally. And when it comes to non-violent sicknesses of the mind, we tend to have sympathy. But when it comes to those who are just as sick but commit vicious, horrible crimes, the disconnect is there when it comes to identifying the sickness of it all, and that if they were in their right mind or did not have that sickness, they may have very well in their right mind not have done any of these things at all. I'm not here to excuse anybody, nor am I here to convict anybody, nor am I here to say that I'm sure that O.J. Simpson did anything or didn't do anything. All I'm saying is I haven't heard the conversation from those who both acknowledge CTE is a real thing and those who claim to believe that O.J. Simpson was guilty ever correlate the two possibilities, when we've seen many instances where individuals with CTE committed horrible, unthinkable, and ridiculously sloppy crimes. And in the time when O.J. Simpson was on trial for this, CTE was not necessarily yet understood to be a thing yet. All I'm saying is, the OJ that my mother described, that she knew, would not have done that. And I had that conversation with my mother on several occasions before she passed away. She was always of the mindset that she did not believe OJ did the crime, but that she believed he knew who did, and that they were likely targeting him in some way. But she was not sure, nor would she put anything past anyone, because people change. That was the understanding she gave me. She would not say that she felt he was guilty, nor would she exclude the idea that he could have been guilty. She just felt, off of her understanding of who she knew, that it was likely that he did not do that for which he was accused. But it had been many years since they had been close. And she believed that there were elements around O.J. Simpson that were not very good after she left his life. After they lost touch, he had some people around him that she felt probably should not have been hanging around him. And as we saw from the trial, that was likely the case. So there's no way of knowing what could have happened or what could have been involved or what type of drugs he may have tripped out on after they had stopped being in contact with one another. Who knows what OJ started getting into spiritually? Who knows? She did not. And that's why she always was fair in a statement to say that she wasn't sure if he did it or not, but the OJ she knew would not have done that. She doesn't believe. My mother said she had been around some individuals who were violent in nature in her past. OJ was not one of those people. So that's my recollection of my mother's take on the situation. Whatever the case may be, this is someone she cared a great deal about. And upon his passing, I think she would be very sad if he wasn't able to reach the gates of heaven, assuming my mother's there herself. We all have to face whatever we gotta face, but when it's time for our loved ones to miss us, if we've done great things in our lives and someone wishes to celebrate us, it's the family that suffers conversations such as these from individuals like Stephen A. Smith, who have a big platform arguing that a man who's died shouldn't be memorialized. The man who's died is already gone. It's his family and his loved ones that are ultimately going to be mourning the thereafter. And so, do they not deserve to see their loved one memorialized, Stephen A? Because you believe he may have been guilty of something he was acquitted of? You know, I'd ask a man like Stephen A. from Hollis, Queens, did you not know some individuals who may have done some things without saying anything? Do you have the same energy for those individuals? That they may have done some things? Or was it that he did this thing in your mind to whom he did it to? And that's unacceptable. I think that's the big argument about this situation. If O.J. Simpson was accused of killing 2 black people, would America care as much about him being acquitted for it? Or was it that it's the appearance that he got acquitted for killing a white woman and a white man, a Jewish man, that makes this situation much more egregious in America's collective mind? I think that's why Stephen A. Smith is taking the backlash, because there's a great deal of people in the community that don't feel that their lives would have been providing so much vitriol for their own killers being acquitted. Instead of a conversation about our lives holding value, mattering, and how much is a black life worth versus a white life or a Jewish life. In today's conversation, that's a big deal, obviously, given the circumstances that are taking place with the genocide that we talk about every day, for which Stephen A. referenced as a Israel versus Palestine conflict. Everyone wants to have conversations about who deserves what, but we're watching circumstances such as these unfold, and many of these same people have nothing to say about it. That's the part that throws me off personally. If we're so quick to be up in arms about someone getting away with a horrific double murder, why are we not too up in arms about a nation, a conglomerate of governments slaughtering 40,000 people plus? Does that not deserve the same concern that they're getting off on this? For this? Not being even in a position to face justice for this? Where's Stephen A's conversation for that? Since he's cognizant enough that there's a conflict going on, why isn't he, and real enough to point out the hypocrisy in all of us, why is he not pointing out the hypocrisy in the very statement that he talked about in regards to that Israel-Palestinian conflict, for which we know is not a conflict, because it's actually Israel targeting children and effectively slaughtering them. This is where I get frustrated, because it's like with the same voice I have to bring this conversation to this channel, I can also acknowledge what Stephen A is talking about. But if Stephen A wants to be considered a credible individual, or anyone else for that matter who wants to bring up the hypocrisy in regards to such crimes, if you're silent about what's going on between Israel and Palestine, then those who are paying close enough attention to that know that you're not as solid as you want us to think you are in regards to this. And the only people you're actually getting over on in that regard are individuals who are not paying attention to that. So when individuals say Stephen A, like Willie D may have said, I don't want to quote him, but Willie D was essentially saying that Stephen A has handlers behind him, and they put him up there to echo the things that they refuse to say. This angle that I just pointed out lends itself to that, because why aren't you talking about that with your platform? Why is it that those two lives mean so much more than any other circumstances where lives are being lost? At the very least, could we admit that so much footage has been shown that this conflict that we're discussing here isn't really a conflict, but more so just ethnic cleansing? All I'm saying is this, man. People who are paying attention to that specific thing know that there's more to a lot of these let's have a real conversation individuals than what they're leading on. And they will only speak about certain things that will allow them to keep their lives going, because the people who support what it is that's going on in Israel-Palestine are behind them. And Stephen A is yet again showing us that he's one of those individuals, that he is not oblivious to this circumstance, but will not talk about it as honestly as he is in condemning a dead black man for maybe killing 2 white people. Maybe. Quick to condemn us for celebrating this individual who was acquitted, and then want to tell us that this person doesn't care about us when he's not in a position to tell us what he thinks about anything, because he's gone. The whole thing is just, it speaks to what it is that is said about Stephen A being a company guy, man. And if he really had his voice open to say whatever he wants to say, then he would be able to point out some of these horrible things that I described here in regards to that conflict specifically, and maybe other things that he's cognizant of but is not in of liberty to speak freely about. At liberty to speak freely about. So no, I'm not comfortable listening to Stephen A, of someone who didn't know my mother's friend, tell me and everybody else that this man who's no longer with us, who may have done this, maybe not have, may have had CTE, maybe not, didn't care anything about black people when my mother was a black person that this person cared about. Not comfortable with that. When I know Stephen A. Smith didn't know OJ or my mother, or AC, Al Collins, or any of these other individuals in there. He just speaking on what he sees that he seen on TV at a time when this trial was taking place, and running with a statement that was said in regards to OJ believing that he was not black, but he was his own entity because of what it is that he had received for all of the greatness that he displayed on the football field, for which a lot of celebrities may too feel within themselves that they're above the treatment that comes with being a black person in this country because of the favor that they've been shown in regards to whatever celebrity they are or wealth that they may have gained. That doesn't describe who they are. It just speaks to the jaded nature of what they've become. Should we speak so definitively about who they were as a human being when maybe they just needed a wake-up call or some enlightenment, or to just go through what it is that we ultimately seen OJ go through? All I'm saying is there's more to learn about a human being. We're not just one-sided. We're not just as simple as people want to put us out to be. You can take something I may have said when I was high one day on this camera and try to define who I was. Or you could take this and exclude everything else that I may have said that I may have shouldn't. To make it so that you define me in whatever way you want to. You can paint me however you want to, but at the end of the day, I've grown and I will continue to grow. So whatever little excerpt you take from a little moment in time where I may have said something I shouldn't have, or said the greatest thing ever, neither of which describe the person that you're looking at. I've had some ups, I've had some downs. I've had some moments where I was right, I've had some moments where I was terribly wrong. Don't take one sentence that I've said, both great or not so, and put me in a box to try to define who I am. And please, if I were ever accused of something, don't automatically write me off as guilty just because of that accusation. When anyone can accuse someone of something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they did it. Because that's something that we often do. Too often do. I didn't know OJ. I never met the man in my life. I'm not here to vouch for his character no more than to say that my mother did. And for my mother's memory, I made this video. But also for thousands of people who lost their lives in the name of the Israel-Palestine conflict that Stephen A. loosely mentioned in this conversation, who deserve to have that same vitriol pointed at those who have hurt them, killed them, terrorized them, that Stephen A. is pointing at a dead man. BDF 44, I thank you all for watching. I'm out.